Good morning. We are jumping from 1 Samuel directly into 2 Samuel. So if 1 Samuel was not your thing, it is going to be just the same. We are about to read three of the most interesting chapters probably in the entire Bible as far as intrigue and war and politics, if that's your thing. So where are we at? So here's our timeline. So 2000 BC, so that's like 4,000 years ago, long time ago. This is the time of the patriarchs. We are around 1000 BC right now. And again, I should say all of the dates here are not secure. You shouldn't take these too literally. I think we're in the ballpark. Like if you were to ask a biblical scholar, when did the king known as David rule the people of Israel? It was around 1000 BC. It wasn't 2000 BC and it wasn't 5 BC. But I think we're definitely in the ballpark here. And then, of course, we have another 1,000 years to go before Jesus of Nazareth is born. So that gives you some kind of context into when we're talking about the early Iron Age in Palestine. I haven't drawn my map, but that's kind of the period we're in when man and women are learning to harness the power of iron and steel. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to try and get through 3 chapters today because I want to make sure that this class is focused on the content of the Bible and the scriptures, and we're getting a lot of good scripture reading in, and also because it's fascinating, and it's kind of one of those page turners you can't really stop. And so I don't want to just stop in the middle. So why don't we go ahead and jump right in. Just quick recap. Last chapter, which was 1 Samuel 31, Saul is dead. Saul, the first truly anointed king of Israel, has died on the battlefield by his own sword. He's fallen on his own sword. His son Jonathan is dead. It seems as though all of his sons have died except for one, and we'll talk more about that soon. And so it's chaos. The Philistines have essentially routed the Israelites. The Israelites are on the run. The Israelite army has been decimated. And in the middle of all of this, David has been, prior to this, probably a few years before this, has been anointed as the true next king of Israel by Samuel, the last judge of Israel, a prophet, a man of God. And so God himself has anointed David to be the next king of Israel. So let's pick that up. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 to 27. Who would like to read that for me? Thank you, sir.
Now it came about after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, that David remained 2 days in Ziklag. On the 3rd day, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul, with his clothes torn and dust on his head. And it came about when he came to David that he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. Then David said to him, "From where do you come?" And he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." David said to him, "How did things go? Please tell me." And he said, "The people have fled from the battle, and also many of the people have fallen and are dead. And Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also." So David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" The young man who told him said, "By chance I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and behold, Saul was leaning on his spear. And behold, the chariots of the horsemen pursued him closely. When he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me, and I said, 'Here am I.' He said to me, 'Who are you?' And I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he said to me, 'Please stand beside me and kill me, for agony has seized me, because my life still lingers in me.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown which was on his head and the bracelet which was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord." Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and so also did all the men who were with him. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the people of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who told him, "Where are you from?" And he answered, "I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite." Then David said to him, "How is it you are not afraid to stretch out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of the young men and said, "Go cut him down." So he struck him, and he died. David said to him, "Your blood is on your head, for your mouth has testified against you, saying, 'I have killed the Lord's anointed.'" Then David chanted with this lament over Saul and Jonathan his son, and he told them to teach the sons of Judah the song of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. Your beauty, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How have the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. O mountains of Gilboa, let not dew or rain beyond you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled. The shield of Saul was anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How have the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of women. How have the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished?
Isn't it amazing how history can have rose-colored goggles applied to it? Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and gracious. Amazing.
They treated you all so well.
Yeah.
Just gave you everything you ever wanted.
What are your thoughts about this chapter?
He is such a politician at this point anyway.
Yep.
Just
Was it the one that they jammed the spear in the guy behind it?
We're coming to that.
Okay, I
Yeah.
read it, so.
Yep. We're coming to that.
what's amazing, this guy that was chased David for 2 years or whatever it was to kill him. And I mean, all that David went through all that time, having to sell his soul to the enemy and all that stuff because of Saul. And now he's sitting there, I think he recognized what Saul was to the people, and even though he had different feelings about him, was able to kind of say, hey, I know you're weeping. Weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice.
I thought Saul killed himself. So then I was confused there.
So what do you think's happened here?
He either didn't die, or this guy's making it up. Like, he either didn't quite finish the job, or this guy's making it up.
I think this guy, he's an Amalekite, right? So he's not fighting with Israel. If anything, he's an enemy of Israel. Yep. He's probably some battlefield scavenger, came upon Saul. See, obviously came upon Saul, most likely after Saul was dead, and so he grabs his crown and takes his stuff. David, from the Amalekite standpoint, David is not part of Saul's group. David is fighting with the enemy.
Yes.
So the Amalekite thinks, I'm going to get some brownie points here. I'm going to tell him I killed the king, and he's going to, reward me and do great things for me. Well, that kind of backfired on him.
Kind of
did. He
did.
lies about killing the king, and David's like, you killed the king, you die. And off he goes.
Wasn't David fighting the Amalekites?
Yes. And so this is the height of irony, right?
He killed him, didn't he? David killed him, didn't
David had him killed. Yep. David had him killed. And
but this guy, he's like any other person would have reacted with giving me presents and praising me. And David is like, I think that's why he's like a type of Christ, right? Because Jesus also did stuff that we wouldn't expect, right? And so David is kind of that way, where he just does stuff that is not quite what people would think you would do.
That's an understatement. That's it. That's exactly it.
But that's very smart though, because you don't want to set a precedent that killing kings is okay. I don't know, I've been listening to the history of the kings of England, and somebody does something that
Yeah.
sets a precedent, and then they are like, oh, we can start killing kings and then putting in new ones. And
Oh, you just have to turn a few pages,
Yeah.
folks. As soon as you get into 1st and 2nd Kings, you'll see exactly that things start to happen where one will get assassinated, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is a thing. Let's do it, right? And then you see the reigns go from like 30, 40 years to 1, 2 years, months. Yep. Happened in Rome. Look, folks, yeah, nothing is new under the sun.
Oh, right,
of course.
It's okay to cheat on an election, you know. I mean, good example today of well, it's okay now, but it's not going to be okay in 4 years. It wasn't okay 4 years ago.
That's
either.
it's exactly it.
You know, and that's where we're at. We've always been, obviously.
I think it's hard for people to look at the world around us, and I'm guilty of this. I kind of, grow up, you think the world is a certain way, and maybe you're sold a certain image of the way you think the world works, and all these churches are full of God-fearing Christians, and the government is run by righteous people trying to clean up corruption. And then when these things start to happen around you, and you start to realize they've always been broken, I've just been lied to.
We all run through life trying to grasp onto some morsel even of justification for what I want.
Yep.
For what I want, what I did,
Yep.
what I want to do. If I can look around and see, oh, I see Steve Cruz is, doing this on Thursday afternoons. Well, I can go home and take a nap too, or what,
Or the opposite, which is I'm willing to forgive all manner of horrible choices in someone because I want them to represent who I am as a person. Look, people don't vote for politicians because objectively on paper they are the best qualified candidate. When has that happened? Yeah. In the history of the United States, when has that happened? No. People vote for candidates for office because they feel that they personify who they want to be or that they relate to them. Or want to relate to them. I want to relate to this person. I want them to do certain things. And I am willing to forgive the most horrible of crimes that they've also committed in order to do that. Folks, things were exactly the same 3,000 years ago.
And by the way, look what this guy did, And
the same forever.
But in spite of all this, David held the office of the king in high respect. In spite of everything Saul did to deserve David being disloyal to him, he never was. And maybe that's something we can take from this as well.
He's still waiting on God's timing and when it was going to be his time.
Actions. It's exactly right, Steve. You look at the world and you look at what David just did here, you're like, how many modern leaders would do that? They would have jumped right on the bandwagon and said, yeah, thank you, you're right, that guy was awful. It's pretty remarkable. And David, on many occasions, his life was in danger. He was going to be killed by Saul. And yet, when David had the chance to end things or allow other people to end it for him, he stopped it. That's foreign to us today.
It's a good practical example of how, it says to love our enemies and to, when they hurt you, that you're supposed to being nice to them is keeping burning coals on their head, right?
It is.
And that's
it is
a good example.
Your enemy expects you to retaliate, seek revenge, harm them back. And when you don't, you will be like David. You will do something that they, as so far out of left field, they never would have seen that coming. Ever.